Okay. Thank you all. Welcome to today's full council meeting. Welcome to the members of the public who are attending in the public gallery, those in the conference hall, and those watching this meeting via our YouTube channel. For those in the building, I'd like to draw your attention to the emergency evacuation procedure. Please leave the chamber by the nearest exit and congregate by the cathedral. There's no fire alarm tests planned. Can you please also make sure your phones are on silent? And as chair of the meeting, I would like to remind everyone to treat each other with due courtesy, tolerance and respect. Disruption to this meeting will not be tolerated, and if there is continued disruption, I will have no choice but to temporarily adjourn the meeting. So, agenda item 2. At the moment, I only have 2 apologies for absence from Councillors Denyer and Hussain. Are there any other apologies? No? Brilliant. Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. May I ask whether any councillors have any interest to declare regarding the items on today's agenda? No? Brilliant. So, moving on to agenda item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. I'd like to move that the minutes of the full council meeting held on the 9th of January 2024 be agreed as a correct record. Do I have a seconder?
Seconded, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Parsons. Can I take it then that the minutes are agreed? Thank you. So moving on now to agenda item 5, Lord Mayor's business, and I have a couple of items. First off, Council notes the sad news that former Councillor Alan Tasker has recently passed away. Alderman Tasker served Clifton Ward from 1987 to 1995 and was active in a number of charitable organisations. I'd like to invite Councillor Richard Eddy to say a few words in remembrance.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I was privileged to know Alan Tasker for a number of years before my election in '92, and for 3 years we served together on council. At the time, I was probably a mischievous young fogey. Now I'm a mischievous old fogey. Gosh, how times have changed. Alan Tasker was a proud Bristolian, and I believe his mother is still pictured in an oil painting at the Mansion House. Alan served as a distinguished councillor for Clifton between 87 and 95. Together with his fellow councillor John Breton, they formed a very effective team. John's beautiful house in College Road often was a draw for Tory fundraisers and served, in fact, it starred in the 1970s BBC drama The House of Elliot. Alan was a quintessential gentleman in both senses of the word. I well recall a planning meeting in the early 90s under Labour's redoubtable Andrew May. Councillor Holland was also there. Both she and Alan indicated they wished to speak at the same time, and he called Alan first. Alan, being Alan, of course said, "But ladies first." It is the first time, Lord Mayor, from that day to this, I've ever seen Helen Holland lost for words. A successful businessman, a trustee of several Bristol charities, Alan wed his vivacious wife Lindy relatively late in life and was intensely proud of their daughter Sasha. I well recall Alan's delight when they both waved at him, Sasha, a very young girl, in civic processions. We send them our love and condolences for a life well lived. Lindy was a devoted trustee of the wonderful organisation Young Bristol. Alan demonstrated his commitment to the future by being incredibly passionate about this charity and was a committed vice president. May he rest in peace. Finally, although you haven't mentioned me yet, Lord Mayor, can I just have a moment about Nigel Curry, who sadly died recently? I remember Nigel fondly as a committed Labour councillor in the South in the early 90s. We became close friends when he crossed the chamber and joined us in the Conservative Party. Despite our, shall we say, interesting differences over the European Union, which he viewed as more benignly and I viewed as the devil's harlot, I believed he was a committed, principled and honest politician. Again, my condolences to his friends and family.
Thank you very much, Richard. And now to possibly the saddest item I've had in any of my meetings. It's with great sadness that Council also notes the recent tragic deaths of children in Bristol over the past few weeks, from Knoll West to Easton and most recently in Sea Mills. So I ask members of Council to join in a minute's silence to offer our sincere condolences to the families, friends and communities for their loss at this incredibly difficult time. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 6, the public forum. Within the Constitution, there is no provision for public forum at the budget meeting. However, as indicated on the agenda, it has been agreed that petitions and written statements about the reports on this agenda could be submitted to this meeting. Details of the petitions and statements received here have been published on our website. No petitions and 3 statements were received by the deadline. A list will be displayed on the screen. The statements have been circulated to councillors and the Mayor prior to this meeting, and I now ask full council to note the statements. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7, Budget Report 2024-25. I'd like to refer members to the budget procedure document which was published in the agenda papers and available on the website. For ease of reference, a paper copy of the procedure has been placed in the public gallery. As this procedure technically varies from our standing orders, please can I ask full council to formally agree to suspend the relevant standing orders which relate to the policy and budget framework. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. We now start with section 1 of the procedure. I'd like to ask Mayor Rees to introduce, summarise and move the budget report. Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So I'm proposing our 8th balanced budget. Before getting into it, though, I just want to remind us of the context within which we bring this budget. It's characterised by austerity, inflation, the consequences of Brexit, the war in Ukraine, and our national political instability. Unprecedented financial challenge for local government, 8 council bankruptcies since 2021, including 2 core cities, 1 in 5 local authorities struggling to make ends meet and at risk of bankruptcy, and a quarter of councillors nationwide who think that their council may need to issue 114 notice in the next 5 years. And we've just had notice that today, Birmingham have proposed a council tax increase of 21% while putting cut measures in place to balance their budget. The important thing is there is no alternative context within which we are working and in which we bring this budget today. We live within a financial context that we don't welcome, but is real and is upon us. And the challenge is that this financial pressure is landing on us, as it is all councils, at the very moment our city needs us most. Households remain under pressure during the continuing national cost of living crisis and the ongoing consequences of the cost of living crisis. So in terms of our time in office, I'd say it's been led by housing, hunger and hope. Making sure people have affordable places to live in settled mixed communities, making sure our children are fed as an accurate proxy for poverty and inequality, and being ambitious for Bristol. It means getting things done and making sure Bristol's a city in which no one is left behind. And we've worked as a local authority, and it's important to point out how effectively we've worked with our city partners across unions, business, public sector partners, voluntary community sector, to deliver on our promises. We've seen the delivery of 12,500 homes. We've kept open all of our children's centres and libraries. We've signed the City Leap deal, the Bristol City Leap deal, a global first, securing £1 billion of investment into Bristol to decarbonise our energy system. We've opened a new recycling centre in South Bristol, which continues to go from strength to strength. We've turned Bristol into a living wage city, meaning an immediate pay rise for thousands of Bristolians. And we've invested in Bristol's ageing infrastructure, from the harbour walls to the bridges. Bristol's budget this year is again led by building homes. Ensuring people have a safe, secure and affordable home is the single most significant contribution we can make to tackling poverty and climate change, improve population health and driving our city region ambition. Homes, the right homes built in the right places, are at the heart of a just transition. So we've got Bristol building. Of those 12,500 homes, 86% have been built on previously developed land. 3,000 more new homes are under construction, and another 3,000 new council homes are in the pipeline for 2029. Our draft local plan has faced up to the challenge of meeting the needs of a growing population in a finite land area and building more densely to prevent urban sprawl and to protect land for nature. We must also get the basics right, which we've done in this budget: emptying bins, fixing potholes, investing in our leisure facilities, improving transport for all, including the way cyclists and pedestrians get around, and protecting the most vulnerable. And this approach will allow the council to ensure services are right-sized and can continue to deliver on its key priorities and plan appropriately for sustainable long-term change. We've retained our council tax reduction scheme, supporting 32,000 households with up to 100% discounts. Our local crisis prevention fund continues after helping around 5,000 households this year with essentials like food and fuel. And working as one city, over 100 welcoming spaces opened to help people and support people to stay warm and connected during the coldest months. Our proposed capital programme amounts to £2.7 billion, including the HRA in 24-25. The programme was updated last year for several major capital programmes of works that help the city invest to grow. The regeneration of Bristol's Temple Quarter was launched after securing £100 million from government. The university campus is underway and Temple Island is being cleared ahead of the LNG development scheme. Bristol Beacon reopened its doors but now as a world-class music venue. And we're about to appoint Western Harbour master planners. This year, the way we are addressing our financial constraints in the capital programme that previously resulted in a lower proportion of our projects being funded by Investing to Save. Two Invest to Save additions are children's services projects, which will aim to tackle the problems in the supply of children's fostering sufficiency and children's home sufficiency placements. Now, there are some fundamental challenges for local authorities across the country. It's the increase in demand for adult and children's services. At the same time, the cost of providing those services is increasing. 7,000 adults receive care from the council, costing our taxpayers around £200 million, and 800 children receive care packages that cost around £100 million. Alongside that, we spend £20.4 million providing temporary accommodation for an increasing number of people falling on the council for housing, and that number rises every year. We remain ambitious in our vision and objectives for Bristol and are committed to ensuring that services to children and vulnerable adults are delivered, but there are challenges ahead. And we have launched transformation projects into those key areas of growing spend. The challenge for the incoming administration will be to complete them. If you don't control the spend in those areas, there will be no money to deliver on other priorities and you'll become a social care provider only. We have to keep the ambition for delivering an inclusive city through the provision of high-value jobs within a diverse economy. And to this end, we're investing in early intervention with the world-class £12 million South Bristol Youth Zone opening next year. At Portway Park and Ride, we opened Bristol's first new train station in almost a century, with work well underway on another at Ashley Down. We secured £41 million to support the introduction of the Clean Air Zone, which in itself contributed to a 10% drop in nitrogen dioxide pollution across Bristol. And to add to what I shared on the City Leap earlier, by 2029, we will have seen £770 million invested in clean energy in the city, the creation of 1,000 new jobs, and we'd have cut 150,000 tonnes of emissions from our city region economy. So we have faced huge challenges, not just recently, but over our entire time in office. Many of them are still with us and will continue. But we've made an absolute priority of working with the city, and through that partnership work with Bristol, we have made real progress on helping Bristol to begin living up to its potential. Now, I'm happy to commend this budget to the council as our 8th balanced budget, but I also recognise that this is my last budget. We've made sure that our officers were available to councillors in this chamber to hear from you, to help you work up the amendments that you want to this budget for when the next administration takes over in May to begin to deliver. But this really has been an opportunity for you to grab hold of this budget, and that handover to you starts today. So over to you.
Thank you, Marvin. I'd like now, section 2 of the procedure, I'd like to ask Councillor Cheney, Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Finance, Governance and Performance, to second the budget report.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. 70% of our budget now goes on demand-led services, temporary accommodation and social care. Bristol is not alone in dealing with central government's failure to grasp the net on these massive issues, but we are, through good financial management, able to propose an 8th balanced budget. Aware that this administration won't be delivering this beyond May, and in the hope that whatever the makeup of the next administration, that they remain focused on those major transformation programmes through which the Council will either succeed or fail. The national crisis in health and social care system continues to threaten and squeeze everything else the Council does, and so budgets for things that citizens quite rightly expect the Council to provide get smaller and smaller whilst we continue to contain the failures of national government. Inflation continues to hit services hard, and I'm pleased that we've been able to find an additional £4 million for Bristol Waste to enable them to continue to do their good work in collecting everyone's waste, that we found £3 million more for temporary accommodation and another £5 million for children's services, where post-COVID demand continues to soar. Beyond balancing the many complicated and competing priorities and protecting the most vulnerable through what must be the most difficult time local government has faced in the last 70 years, this budget continues with our capital programme, ambitious but prudent with taxpayers' money. Repairing alien infrastructure, investing in the city's economy, and building homes for Bristolians in what continues to be one of the most expensive cities in the UK to live. The capital programme includes over £7 million for parks and green spaces, over £130 million for transport improvements, over £50 million capital for special educational needs places, and £1.4 billion investment in council housing in the HRA, and another £65 million for housing in the General Fund, our part in tackling the housing crisis engulfing the country. The budget proposes a 4.99% council tax increase in order to support the service delivery of the council. We continue to believe that council tax is not the best way to fund problems in social care, particularly during this cost of living crisis, but remain constrained by national legislation. Over the past 8 years, we have delivered a huge amount, despite all the challenges we have faced on a local, national and international level. I'm proud to present this budget, balanced for this year and with a plan for the next 5 years, when so many other authorities across the country are struggling so desperately. I look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Craig. Now, section 3 of the procedure. Each party group will now, in turn, respond to the budget proposals. There is a maximum time allocation of 7 minutes each. So firstly, I'd like to call on Councillor Emma Edwards to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think we can already hear that the themes of this. And last year, the phrase austerity is cutting local authorities to the bone was used a lot. And in the past year, as mentioned, we've seen councils like Birmingham and Slough go bankrupt, more cuts, and requests to find savings within essential services that are already under immense pressure, all while inflation rises and people are still being crippled by a cost of living crisis. I think it's fair to say now that those bones are beginning to break. So we do understand the difficulty in being able to set a balanced budget at all, and we really respect in particular the work from officers to achieve this. It's not an enviable task. And while we do have grave concerns about this budget, it in no way reflects on the work of officers. While this is primarily due to yet more Tory austerity, a potential new Labour government has not promised to end austerity either, and there is no sign of a fair funding review promised for local councils. We really need more assurance from Labour that they will protect councils from bankruptcy if they form a government. There are many areas of concern for us about this budget. The area of the budget with the biggest deficit is the direct schools grant. This is also, as we know, the largest single element of the budget that bleeds out financial threats to the general fund in the form of home-to-school transport programme. The DSG overspend accumulation has been evident for the best part of 10 years, and the current administration must accept some culpability for this, and most importantly, the impact this has on children and their families in trying to access SEND support, to which they are legally entitled. While we currently have no way of influencing the DSG from the opposition benches, the DSG will continue to be front and centre as our city moves into the committee system. And we must make an effort to rebuild lost trust with SEND parents and strive to prove to them that this council has their best interests at heart. We have serious concerns about the squeeze on adult social care, especially at a time of increased demand, and how this would affect the most vulnerable in society. We've read the statement from the Bristol Reclaiming Independent Living Group about the concerns the disabled community has about the possibility of being forced into care homes and warehouses. And while we appreciate that a review of this is happening, this does not mean that the problem has gone away. And we're going to have to work together soon to find solutions that reassure people that they will be able to continue to access appropriate care for their needs. Last year, the Mayor said at a Members' Forum that he would be open to a more collaborative approach with us, but we have not seen any evidence of this. On the contrary, we have been given less time to see the budget, less time with officers, and no opportunity at all to feed into the budget beyond the usual couple of weeks to put in amendments. And speaking of amendments, how many past budget amendments have been implemented by this administration? Is it worth rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic when so much would need to change to make this budget fair and without making cuts to vital services and schemes? One area where some cross-party work has been achieved, though, is the housing revenue account. The core proposals for the HRA has been, like the proposed local plan, largely put together as a result of cross-party working group informed by consultation, and it shows. However, the impact of the costs associated with the evacuation of Barton House have also got to be covered by the HRA, and it will almost certainly fall to the next administration to determine what could and couldn't have been done differently in relation to Barton House. Much of Bristol's council housing stock, and particularly its high-rise blocks, are ageing and bring significant challenges. To bring them up to a standard both in terms of providing a decent home, but also in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. It's not just crumbling bridges and harbour infrastructure that is being left for the next administration to pick up. We need to learn all the lessons from Barton House, however uncomfortable those lessons may be, to prevent another situation that puts council tenants in such a distressing situation. But overall, the HRA provides a rare ray of positivity within the council's budget framework, and therefore we look forward to seeing less photos of politicians on unfinished building sites, but more pictures of families moving into decent, low-carbon homes with secure tenancies where households can thrive. I'm sure this is a vision that all councillors in this chamber share. But aside from scant working groups and scrutiny, let's be clear, this is a Labour budget put forward by an outgoing mayor who is not going to be around to implement it. Neither are many members of his cabinet, and it's very concerning that the outgoing mayor has not taken this into account. The budget doesn't start today, it should have started 6 months ago, and that fantasy promises can be made without a proper plan of implementation. Cans have been kicked down the road, pans put on the back burner to bubble over to prevent Labour from having to make unpopular decisions before the election. This would have been such a perfect opportunity to collaborate and show enthusiasm about cross-party working in the committee system, and how disappointing that this hasn't happened. We appreciate the work other parties have done, though, to put in amendments, and my colleagues will comment more on those in more detail later. We understand that our Tory colleagues are comfortable with finding savings through even more cuts to vital parts of the budget, such as the council tax reduction scheme, but as Greens, we simply do not. But from May, not for council tax reduction scheme we didn't, we abstained actually. But from May we will have a fresh start, and many councillors in this chamber have made the decision to restand and work under the new committee system, and I really commend people from all parties that will. This is a chance to revitalise the democratic process in Bristol. I really hope that this will foster a new attitude. I hope that we can adopt, if not a culture of collaboration, at least more cooperation and consensus building. And we can work together on those tough challenges for the good of our residents. We are capable of this. We've seen positive cross-party working in the local plan working group and in the committee model working group. Next year, let's be honest, it's unlikely we'll have more funds to work with, and we hope our friends across the chamber will join us in lobbying for increased funding from central government, whoever that government may be. What we would like to see as the Green Group is a budget that prioritises essential services, that cares for the most vulnerable in society, and works harder to protect people from austerity.
30
over
seconds,
bailing out big
Councillor.
businesses, vanity projects and chasing a failed model of economic growth. And more importantly, we believe this is what the people of Bristol want too.
Thank you, Emma. And now I'd like to ask Councillor Tom Renard to respond for the Labour Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm proud that Labour is putting forward a balanced budget that remains ambitious for Bristol whilst protecting frontline services. Across the country, 14 years of Tory and Lib Dem austerity is proving too much for many councils, having to effectively declare bankruptcy as the money runs out. The projected shortfall for local government runs into the billions this year, and that's just so councils can stand still. These include councils of all stripes, as the challenges of adult social care, children's services and ballooning temporary accommodation costs decimate budgets across the country. I recently attended an emergency summit on the temporary accommodation crisis, which saw councils from across the country tell the same story. Fuelled by the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis and the failure of the national government to deliver on renters reform, which will give people the protection so desperately needed. After all, a safe, secure, warm home should be seen as a right, not a commodity to extract the highest price from. Despite this, and in no small part down to Mayor Rees's Labour administration, Bristol remains resilient. We're able to protect frontline services, invest in the city's council housing stock, and maintain our position as the only core city with a full council tax reduction scheme. And of course, we're not without our challenges, but we don't have the luxury of being able to sit this one out when faced with tough decisions. We're providing the leadership the city needs, taking the tough decisions that need to be made, protecting the most vulnerable in our city, and investing in the economic future of Bristol and its citizens. Bristol City Council has had millions removed from its budget in real terms since 2010, and the cost of statutory services like adult social care, children's services and temporary accommodation continue to rise, leaving little left for discretionary spending. This means every pound is having to stretch further and further. The amendments today, or lack of, reflect this. The Lib Dems propose cutting the Climate and Ecological Reserve, which pays the salaries of staff members in the Climate and Ecological team, and the Community Resilience Reserve, which invests in the resilience of our voluntary and community sector. And the Tories are back again, for the third year in a row, trying to cut the council tax reduction scheme, taking money from the worst off in the city to fund a number of things, including the eviction of van dealers on the Downs. We have continued to protect the council tax reduction scheme as a red line of this administration, and we've managed to do so through strong fiscal management and focusing on the right priorities. To perhaps be generous, I'm sure that in an ideal world they'd rather fund the measures in your amendments from ways other than the funding sources identified. But at least you have the guts to get up and put forward your own solutions to the challenges facing Bristol. If you absent yourself from the entire process and willing to operate in the country's political reality of continued austerity, you may as well not be here. I've heard Green Party councillors say, imagine the difference Green Party MPs could make in Parliament. Well, they're not making much of a difference here in City Hall. And their excuses don't hold up. Tories and Lib Dems have put forward amendments and they've had the same access and support as you. I also wonder though, is this some principled stand as you claim? Or have you just not put forward alternative proposals that could get through that process? Have you been able to engage in political reality? Maybe there were amendments, they just didn't make it through. Maybe they didn't meet the council's fiscal rules. Principled stand or an ability to get their heads around the rules and demonstrate fiscal competence. However, Labour's not in politics to make excuses. We're here to make a difference, and this budget does that. Frontline services protected. A fifth of libraries across the UK have closed their doors permanently, none of which are in Bristol. Almost 800 youth centres have closed since 2010. We're bucking the trend and investing millions in a world-class youth zone for South Bristol. Council tax reduction scheme protected. The only major city in the UK to offer up to 100% discount on the worst off council tax bills. Doing this is no mean feat. It's projected to cost the council 43 million next year. As it's such a significant investment, I'd like to remind councillors that if we fail to set a balanced budget and government commissioners get sent in if we were to go bust, the scheme would likely be the first of many things on the chopping block. That's the price you pay for principled stances of not setting balanced budgets for political reasons. And the HRA business plan will see more than 3,000 extra council homes in the next 5 years, giving someone in need of a home a safe, secure, permanent roof over their head, one of the most significant interventions that we can make in someone's life. So over 3,000 households that will be off the housing waiting list. Over 3,000 households' lives changed immeasurably for the better. And it's vital that we continue our work to build homes through all routes possible, particularly at a time when it appears some developers are cutting back their pipelines due to the economic conditions. And it's not just about doing it in principle, it's also about doing it in practice, something that you'd be well aware of having not backed council housing schemes in various parts of the city. Now, these are the headline figures of the HRA budget, but the small print is equally important. We will continue to invest in our existing stock, hundreds of millions of pounds, including for building and fire safety, decent homes, new bathrooms and kitchens, damp and mould, upgraded CCTV across our estate, playgrounds and much more. We can be proud of our record of delivery over the last 8 years, although we will not be complacent. And whilst others grapple with an inability to make the tough decisions, we will continue to put forward a positive vision for the city and do what we can to protect the most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'd now like to call on Councillor Mark Weston to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. And first of all, can I just start by, Councillor Cheney, I've got your back. They have been consulting on the budget for 6 months. It was the Finance Task Group. They were meeting all of last year. You had representatives on it. So it has been consulting on it. I'm sorry, there was something in my coffee that wasn't Canderel, because I just got a budget speech applauded. I'm very sorry. Don't worry, it'll all change now. Well, ironically, the first bullet point on my speech was the pantomime of Bristol budget politics, so we're proving that. Go team. No, you're not. Could I very much, first of all, thank Councillor Cheney and your finance team and the whole finance officers. This is a thankless task. And obviously, the part when you're trying to set a budget is you don't like setting elements of it, but you still do it because that's what grown-ups do when you try and set a balanced budget to itself. So thank you. Even if we don't agree, we recognise the effort that's gone into it, so I appreciate that. Now, that's obviously the highlight of our political year, where no doubt the 50 people on YouTube are dazzled by our wit and prose as we indulge in the pantomime that is it is, by the way, don't start that again, the pantomime that is the political budget process. And it's also a day for budget bingo, which is my very favourite, where we've heard, oh, it's great. So far, I've not got a full house, but there's still some speeches to come, so I should be okay. So we've had austerity, where you obviously blame everything on austerity. I understand that. I distinctly, though, do remember Alistair Darling, God rest his soul, standing up and saying, we will halve the deficit within 4 years. Now, the coalition government reduced it by 1/3 in 4 years. So which bit did we forget to cut that you were going to? Out of curiosity on that one. And we also then have, well, we need more money. I agree. Local government does need more cash. Absolutely. The problem is where it's going to come from. And forgive me for saying this, but National Labour financial promises these days do seem to change direction with all the rapidity of a weather vane in a hurricane. So I'm not quite sure where that money's coming from. I'm also not sure where it's coming from because of the global challenge we face. If we're honest about it, if we look globally what's happening now, we have Putin on the march in the east, we've got autocracies in the Far East, we have instability across the world. Where's the money coming from? Any spare money we have is probably going to end up in security services because that's what we actually need. Now, green economics. Let's turn to that one. So, I'm sorry, but politics is the art of taking part, surely. It was a struggle to get through the amendments, that's absolutely true. You have a tighter financial envelope, that makes it trickier each and every year. But we still managed to do it. If there was nothing to find, just as a case in point, on the clean air zone, and I'm not advocating a rapid change of policy, anyone, there's a decommissioning sum of 600,000. I would have thought the Greens would have been all over that, wanting to keep their beloved, our dreaded and hated, clean air zone. But you didn't even try for that. Surely that was a low fruit you could have gone for. I'm delighted you haven't, by the way. It's really good. I'm looking forward to it ending. But you have to be part of the conversation. To stand there and say this is a principled stance helps no one. The budget today is not perfect. I would say it's not even that good, if I'm honest about it, but that's why we have amendments in on it. But at least we're trying to make the difference. There are decent elements to it. Actually, parts of the housing revenue account are very good, and one was mentioned earlier was the temporary accommodation team. I've actually worked with them on a few of my ward issues. They are doing sterling service in very challenging times. I would single them out. There are good bits to it, but the budget has bear traps in the shrubberies, which if anyone is a fan of Terry Pratchett, they'll recognise the Commander Vimes quote. There are bear traps in there. We have the clean air zone. That money will run out. It's bridging the gap for the moment, but that ends, I hope, as soon as possible. The council tax reduction scheme, which was voted for last year, and it was, and it went through. Any government that we go and ask more money for, the first thing they're going to point to is say, why are you the only major city with that fully funded? They are going to look at that straight away. And we know at some point that will have to change. Is it not better to do it on our own terms and at a timing of our choosing than be forced to do it down the line? Because the challenges are not getting any less on the horizon. There isn't some socialist utopia galloping over the hill. We then come to the dedicated schools grant. Now that is a nuclear bomb that could go off. We have to make sure that is fixed. That is the bear trap. And the deficit on the high needs grant. The challenges facing us, including SEND, adult social care, they are enormous. But to try and sit there and say, oh, they're huge, but we're not going to try and do anything or fix anything, and absolve yourself of responsibility today, doesn't make no sense. That's poor English, I do apologise. Makes no sense at all. So today we are going to be putting forward our proposals. We're going to put forward our amendments. I have absolute faith that none of them are going to get through. Hence the politics and the pantomime that are about to follow. Because I know how this votes, nothing funny, we know how it's going to go. They're not going to get through. Then what's going to happen is, despite the fact you've not amended the budget, you're still going to vote against it. So you haven't even tried that one. So the budget today is going nowhere. I look forward to dusting off this speech, blowing the dust off it, brushing it down, and delivering the same one next Wednesday. Because this pantomime is going on for another 4 hours before the sequel arrives next week. Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Mark, and we'll do our best to fill your bingo card by the end of the meeting. I'd like to now invite Councillor Joss Clark to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. It's always a bit of a tough gig actually following you, Mark.
I'll applaud randomly, don't worry.
Thank you. I appreciate that in advance. The budget papers certainly outline the challenges faced by the city, particularly regarding funding constraints, demand for services and inflationary pressures. Despite the Mayor setting a budget and implementing savings, the Council still faces significant financial pressures, which necessitate prioritising funding for key services. On a positive note, it is important to acknowledge investment in areas like decarbonisation and housing development, and the collaborative effects to address deficits in specific funding areas like the dedicated schools grant. Looking at the current revenue budget position for 23-24, we see a net overspend which primarily stems from the risks within adult social care, resources and growth and regeneration directorates. And it is clear that moving forward, we will have to keep a close eye on these pressures in the coming year. We can also see a service pressure identified for temporary accommodation, primarily due to demand growth outstripping expectations. Mitigation opportunities will have to be explored this year and a one-off provision made in next year's budget to allow time for long-term solutions to be identified. So where does this leave us as a Liberal Democrat group? We can all see that things are very tight this year and local government is being squeezed year on year as the settlement from the Conservative government is reduced. The council has become more agile as it works with external partners to be able to deliver services, and these partnerships will have to be nurtured to enable us to deliver core services moving forward. But we do feel that this year has been particularly difficult for us to get the information to fully integrate the budget process. This, we feel, has come from the lack of collaboration and openness on behalf of the administration. I'm hoping that in future years there can be more of an open attitude from all parties. Speaking personally, it has felt more difficult this year working with officers to get the information that we require to fully understand the budget. And the process seems to have been more convoluted than in previous years. Let's hope we can sort this out and moving forwards. Moving on to the actions of the Green Party, I don't particularly want to come between the Labour group and the Green group in their very public slanging match in the media this morning. But what I feel is worth pointing out is that the Green group have not covered themselves in any glory here, particularly when Councillor Edward is quoted saying, "We felt that we could not take part in a cut budget proposed by an administration that excludes opposition parties in the process." I do think they need to reflect on this position as the optics for them look terrible. And if you are the largest group in May, you will need to face up to some unpalatable decisions. Surely it would have been better to have been at the table rather than looking like you're flouncing out. The conclusion that I have to take from the Green Party's position is that you are intending to rewrite the budget after the May elections, and I think this concern has been realised in Councillor Mack's quote. "I do not rule out the need for a future administration to amend this budget to make it work and deal with the unrealistic savings claimed here." A word of caution. Amend, yes. Via money, yes. But please do not think that you will rewrite the whole thing come May. Finally, I would like to conclude by making the observation that the city finds itself in a tough financial situation. This has not been helped by poor financial management of the Labour group's administration over the years, and we could debate ad nauseum whether we would have had to make such drastic cuts if the Mayor had not persisted in his vanity projects of wasting millions on his pet schemes and Bristol Energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Joss. I'd like to now ask Councillor Gary Hopkins to speak on behalf of the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll just actually firstly refer to our two modest amendments last year. First one was to recover some money to spend in parks, and I'm afraid, although that was unanimously passed, the experiences actually showed that the administration did everything to try and prevent it actually being put into practice. The second thing was that we had money for the Cause Célèbre Jubilee Pool, which unfortunately at the last minute the Greens collapsed under pressure from the Mayor, or most of them did, a few honourable exceptions, and we therefore didn't get that passed, even though people in this chamber knew that it was the right thing to do. We acknowledge that the administration, this one and the next one, faces significant financial pressures. It's not easy, but I've got to say that when you look at things like the Bristol Energy Company, this administration has not helped itself. We faced a position where when we were first challenging on this, Labour administration, the Labour councillors, blocked an independent inquiry into this, which was most unfortunate. And then eventually, with the support of the independent auditors, we got it shut down. In the meantime, it had been losing £1 million a month. You can actually do rather a lot with £1 million a month, and this council should reflect on what actually happened there. Bristol Waste, the other second company owned by this administration, started with a golden inheritance. The circumstances were tremendous in the way it actually took over from our defaulting outside contractors. Unfortunately, turnover of staff, some of them very good staff and being got rid of, didn't help the situation. And it's getting by, but it's not in the wonderful situation it was at the beginning. We hope that Gorham Homes does significantly better. We support the concept of having a housing company. It's absolutely right. Let's see how it's actually run. We've had wastage of capital and revenue on a number of different projects. Going through them all would eat up more than the 7 minutes that are allowed to us. And I want to stress the short-sighted attitude to asset transfers. This administration waits until there's an emergency and then tries to offload. And that basically is not the way to do things. We need to look at how an asset can be best managed, whether it's by the council or whether it's by an outside body, and then take proper steps and support them when they're put out. I was actually also concerned the other day. I turned up for a meeting looking at the annual plan, how we actually put into practice a management plan, and looking at from a scrutiny point of view, how we actually look at that. What concerned me was during the first 10 minutes it became obvious that two or three of the givens, two or three of the priorities would not be the priorities of an ongoing council. And yet we've got officers committed to, in actual fact, delivering those projects and delivering those priorities, which, it costs money. And I think, although there was criticism of the thought of reviewing things at the start, after May, I think that's absolutely essential. We need to check whether all the priorities are really the priorities that we have on a way going forward. And that involves, so I would recommend that every committee's first job is to review the areas that it's responsible for and decide whether they're the right things. And then if they regard the need for change, that be brought back to full council for discussion. Because there's no point in continuing to employ officers to do things which are not a priority for this council. And I think that way provides a positive way forward. And it's easy to complain about it, but it's what's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And can I just say, while I'm in that corner, it's nice to see you back in the chamber, Chris. You're looking well. Okay, we're now moving on to section 4 of the procedure. A report on behalf of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board was published as a supplement to the agenda papers. I now invite Councillor Tony Dyer to introduce the report as Chair of OSM.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm going to speak very briefly before handing over to Councillor Gollop to discuss in more detail the scrutiny report. What I will just quickly mention is that there have been challenges for scrutiny, and that includes the failure to produce a 4-month forward plan rather than the statutory 28 days required by legislation. That has impacted upon our ability to scrutinise decisions that are coming forward, some of which have had budgetary impacts. Under the committee model, obviously there would be neither a mayor nor a chair of OSM nor a separate scrutiny function, so a different process would be in place. And I think one of the key challenges will be to ensure that we are able to provide that advance warning of decision making coming forward to ensure that both internal and external scrutiny are able to take place fully. However, I now hand over to my colleague, Councillor Gollop, so that he can cover the rest of the report. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Tony. And I'd now like to invite Councillor Jeff Gollop to present on behalf of the Resources Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I apologise to members that I'm speaking from a typed-up speech, but it's an attempt to remind me that I've got to be apolitical and not suddenly go off on a political diatribe. So please bear with me. But first of all, I want to start with some thank yous. The first thank you is to members of the Finance Task Group and indeed the Resources Scrutiny Commission, who've had some 15 meetings on matters relating to the budget. And dare I say it, over some 6 months. And 3 members of the Green Group made really positive contributions to those discussions. So I think that does need to be said. But we've worked together to scrutinise budget cross-party in a constructive and positive way. I hope the atmosphere of working together will set the tone for the future Resources Policy Committee and the Finance Subcommittee. Now, probably the most controversial thing I'm going to say now, as far as opposition members are concerned, is a thank you to Craig. I wouldn't for one moment, Craig, say that I agree with everything you've done, but a few of them I might. But I do respect the way that you've done it, sharing openly with the task group the very significant challenges. You helped to create a feeling of openness and trust without any hint of aggression or anger. And it's been a pleasure working with you over the last 8 years. Thank you. My third thank you is to the finance team, who now have the most remarkable grasp of the challenges that face the City Council and what the impacts of those are and what the variances might be. That team has worked so incredibly well, which is hardly surprising given the lead given from Denise Murray. I really do hope, Denise, that you've seen the intensity of our questions as a compliment, and we welcome the firm and honest answers that we've received throughout. Thank you for all you've done for our city over your time with us. Now, in presenting this report, my Lord Mayor, I do acknowledge I've not been around as long as Helen or Richard. But I did discover that I was chairing the first finance scrutiny meeting that took place when I first came on council, and full circle, I'm still doing the same thing now. You can comment as you will on that later. But I wanted to move to the detail of the report. I am assuming you will all have read the report, as you will every page of the budget papers. But just in case, I thought I might just highlight a couple of key issues. So in Growth in Regen, we do warn the impact of reducing CAS money to fund recurring annual expenditure, thus ensuring ongoing budget pressures for years to come. And Waste Services, I would say we were reassured that Bristol Waste was now considered a viable business, although I would add that many of my residents are currently questioning that on the basis of an inability to collect over the last 2 months. Raise the question of the transport levy, and I remind you these are cross-party comments, not mine, they're shared by all members. We were concerned that the figure for the transport levy is not increased. Members who serve on WECA committees were also disturbed that in Bristol we were told that WECA sets the levy, and in WECA we were told that the unitary authorities set the levy. So much for openness and transparency with WECA. We have concerns about the capital programme, where delivery is still falling short in spite of repeated efforts to improve it. And we also add, which we've mentioned in previous years, we see Invest to Save as an area that should be given much more priority. A lack of officer capacity and ability to deliver such projects needs to be addressed. The potential financial benefits are too great to ignore because we are not able to deliver. I want to just comment on adult care, where we noted the service still has many challenges, but we also noted that significant improvements had been made in forecasting and anticipating demand, and the whole management and the information that was flowing, Helen and your team has improved so immensely. We've had real concern about children and education. Home to school transport's been an issue troubling scrutiny for the whole of its existence. And we're still, it seems, no further forward. We raised last year the issue of the dedicated schools grant, the peril of the ever-widening deficit and the pressures for early years, and particularly the high needs block. The DSG management plan and mitigations are going to be
30 seconds, Jeff. Thanks.
Regular detailed monitoring is going to be critical under the committee system if the council wants to avoid an ongoing threat to its reserves. Our report as submitted, my Lord Mayor, was agreed cross-party, and I've tried to reflect those views in what I've said. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Jeff. Mayor Rees, would you like the opportunity to respond?
No, it's okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We now come to section 5 of the procedure, the consideration of amendments to the budget. We will now work through the amendments proposed by each of the political groups. Each amendment will be moved, seconded and debated in the order shown in the agenda papers. For each amendment, there will be one vote. In terms of each vote, an amendment that is carried shall be carried by a simple majority of those voting. As we move through the amendments, the Chief Financial Officer will advise as necessary if certain amendments are impacted due to an earlier amendment being passed. Once we have dealt with all the amendments, the Chief Financial Officer will confirm the overall position in terms of any amendments that are carried. Before we start on the amendments proper, I would suggest we take a 10-minute refreshment break and come back at 3:10. Thank you. Come on, folks, let's get to order. It was only supposed to be a 10-minute break. We've already been 15. Thank you very much. Okay, moving swiftly on to Amendment 1, the Conservative Revenue Amendment. This amendment involves the revenue section of the budget. There will be one vote at the end of the debate. I'd like to call on Councillor Graham Morris to move the amendment. If he's here. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I rise to propose the first Conservative amendment to the Labour Party budget. The amendments are relatively small, but are likely to have a positive impact on many people across Bristol. Firstly, the proposal will see funds come from the Council Tax Reduction Scheme. This amendment has been consulted on previously, had the support of many in the Chamber, and will bring us more in line with the other core cities. Regrettably, it will impact some people, but I believe it will have a greater impact on many more. We have seen parts of Bristol suffer far too long with the inequalities of the CIL and the area committee system. Many of the suburban areas, those areas with green space, which still contain high levels of deprivation, are unable to bid for funds in an amount that is required to make a real difference to our communities. If we look at Area Committee 6, for example, you have the largest concentration of deprivation in the city, and there are no funds available for Hartcliffe and Withywood and Philwood and Bishopsworth and Stockwood. In fact, facilities are being lost across South Bristol, and we do not have the means to replace or deliver these much-needed facilities. Look at Eagle House Youth Club as a prime example. We have previously secured funds to enable the release of strategic CIL, but of course that can only go to areas of high growth. So yet again, those areas that hold a lot of green space are unable to bid for those funds. And it is really important that we have the right and the ability to deliver change and to improve and enhance the local communities through investing in young people and community activities. So if we turn to some of the other measures, just 12 months ago, Bristol City Council has some of their own staff are overworked housing officers go on strike due to pay and conditions. I think it was maybe the only strike that Labour did not support that year. I have been unable to obtain the true figures, but the number of housing officers has not increased in line with the increase in the number of houses that were being built, and Councillor Renhard mentioned looking to do 3,000 over the next 5 years. And of course, there's an increasing complexity of the tenants that we have. And this city is so focused on the new tenants, it has forgotten, some may say neglected, existing council tenants. These tenants need and deserve our support.
30 seconds, please, Graham.
Okay, let's have a look. So, for those who are clever enough to have listened to my previous speeches, I have talked about the need for greater enforcement. People just seem to get away with it. And finally, we're keeping a small pot of money back because we know there'll be a lot of things coming out of the woodwork next year, with things that have been buried or deferred, problems that have been stored up for the future, and we felt it prudent to retain a small fund to enable some of these issues to be dealt with. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Graham. I'd now like to call on Councillor Henry Michelet to second the amendment.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I rise to second the amendment, and I'm well aware of the hostile reception these revenue proposals will receive from some in the Chamber. As has already been pointed out, the reform in the council tax reduction scheme is something Labour and Green councillors actually voted for last year when passing the Mayor's previous budget. It is also a move which is all but inevitable. This change will eventually have to be made, as it is currently estimated to cost £42 million per year. That is too large a sum to simply ignore or carry. Not only is such a pressure unsustainable, but our proposed minimum contribution was endorsed by the public in the recent consultation. If the administration doesn't like the answer and just ignores the outcome, then this reinforces the widely held view that these engagements are nothing more than a box ticking exercise. It is also notable to all the other core cities require a contribution from working age households or operate banded schemes. Consequently, we do not believe the 10% reduction in the existing relief is unreasonable. My colleague has highlighted some of the important areas towards which extra resources can be put. such as an increase in our planning department. No doubt all members are conscious of the growing backlog in processing applications, which has led to the threat of government intervention if the matter does not improve. So the need for recruitment is urgent. We are suggesting funding for extra staff in planning enforcement, which many here can vouch is a regular subject of casework complaints after breaches in planning agreements, conditions or regulations have taken place. I would also like to mention the importance of a proven need to increase the staffing in neighbourhood enforcement, with a particular focus on fly tipping and the various problems associated with van dwelling. By increasing this supply, we would fully address the issue of the now semi-permanent encampment on the road servicing the Downs. Members should be aware that more and more vehicles are flocking there and causing huge environmental and social issues for neighbours and visitors to the area. Local residents and many recreational users of the Downs feel intimidated by the growing highway encampment. There is an enormous amount of frustration over the seeming inability or reluctance on the part of the Mayor to resolve this issue. By way of contrast, other local authorities have successfully introduced no overnight camping restrictions to protect certain places, and my group's submission seeks to extend or replicate that action to preserve the peaceful enjoyment of
30 seconds, please, Henry.
main open public spaces. We believe a TRO will overcome the present evident political and legal inactivity. For all these reasons, this amendment deserves your support. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Henry. I'd now like to call on Councillor Tony Dyer to speak on behalf of the Green Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And just to reconfirm, we did not vote for this last time, and we will not be voting for it again this time. This amendment is essentially a proposal to once again try and reduce the support provided by the council tax reduction scheme. Or to put it another way, this is an amendment to force some of the poorest people in our city to pay, and the reason why they want this to come in is to provide a reserve, essentially a reserve to protect the council against decisions made by years of austerity by Conservative governments, one after the other. The simple reality is that increasingly councils across the country have had to resort to raising council tax in order to try and plug the gaps left by the failure of Conservative government to fund local councils properly. And as a result, this has increasingly meant that some of our lowest income households are unable to pay the ever-increasing levels of council tax and thus desperately need to support the council tax reduction scheme. It's also astonishing that as part of this amendment, at a time when, as we're revealed, councils of all political persuasions are facing bankruptcy, that one of the amendments for the coming budget is to reduce the council resilience reserve. And the reason for cutting that reserve is simply to allow for some money to be borrowed from the next year's budget, the same budget that they're saying we have to provide this reserve to protect us against further cuts. Mark, I understand why the Conservatives put in amendments. As you said yourself, you don't expect them to be passed. But it's good stuff to put on the literature as you seek to try and stop yourself turning from the Bristol Conservative Party into the Stoke Bishop Community Group. I can understand, but choosing to make the very poor pay more because your party is too scared to tax the very rich, that's the true measure of political cowardice. Our group will be voting against this.
Thank you, Tony. Mark, that's enough. Thanks.
Good for you.
I'd like to call on Councillor Tim Rippington to speak on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Back in the 1990s, when I was on tour in Germany with my band, our drummer went missing after a gig in Hamburg. I spent hours walking the streets looking for him until eventually I found him in a small bar where he was drunkenly begging the barman to serve him another drink. The barman leaned over, looked him square in the face and said, "What part of the word no do you not understand?" So here we are again, just a month or so after we took the decision to retain the council tax reduction scheme in full, and the Tories are proposing once again to take a bite-sized chunk out of it. Last year they wanted 15%, this year it's only 10%. But we know that that money comes directly out of the pockets of the poorest people in our city, the people least able to afford it. That's why we have consistently said no, and that's why we're not about to change our minds now. And why are people struggling financially? Because we've had 14 years of slow growth and stagnation, and now we have a full-blown recession. I'll tell you, what will save us money on the council tax reduction scheme is a new Labour government which will grow the economy and provide good, skilled, well-paid jobs for our citizens. Now, I know the party opposite don't really support the changes to the CTRS. The Task and Finish group, which looked at this last year, was pretty unanimous in their verdict that it needs to remain as it is. There are some things in the amendment that we might have supported if the funding didn't come from the CTRS. We know we need to bolster our planning and enforcement teams, for example, but if this council was properly funded, we would be doing that already. And we are about to invest hugely in our parks, so this amendment would be a drop in the ocean there. And taking money from the least well-off across the city to pay for parking restrictions on the Downs, well, that sounds like the absolute definition of pork barrel politics, to be honest. So we will not be supporting this amendment, and given the cross-party consensus on the Resources Task and Finish group, which considered the CTRS over the summer, I hope no one else will either. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'd now like to invite Councillor Joss Clark to respond on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. My response is going to come without the heat and passion of the other people. I just wanted to lower it because we've got a long meeting ahead of us. Just to say that strangely enough, Tim, I agree with quite a lot of what you said. You know, there are good things in this in terms of things that we would like to support and we would like to increase funding on. But the fact that you're taking it from the council tax reduction scheme seems wholly unjust. I had the fortune to sub on the council tax reduction scheme subcommittee for Councillor Brown here, and it became really apparent to me that you know, any change to it will have consequences, and there will always be a line where people are on the edge of being able to cope. So I think that this city is generous in the fact that we actually offer this scheme where other cities don't. But to actually take a chunk out of this scheme, I think will leave the city poorer, literally, and less well-resourced, and I think that it's something that we should be supporting. Obviously, we would all like to reduce the bulky waste charges and lots of the things that you have within your amendment, but I do not think, my group do not feel that this is the way to do it. So unfortunately, we will not be able to support you in this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Joss. Councillor Hopkins on behalf of the Knoll Community Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Well, last year we did actually vote against the budget because basically on the principle of the council tax reduction scheme, which, you know, an attack upon it was actually floated by the administration. They hadn't made a final decision, but the fact that it was there was worrying for a lot of people. And I think it was quite interesting the way that this developed and was actually progressing towards being implemented until I think the final announcement came after we had a meeting with officers from a scrutiny point of view, and officers actually confirmed what I knew anyway, having been in charge of this department some years ago, that the collection rate would be absolutely disastrous. So not only would we be putting an awful lot of people without much money in a very difficult situation at a very difficult time, but we'd also be wasting a lot of money trying to collect cash off people who don't actually have any. Now that is not good, sensible politics. And the fact that it's actually acknowledged in the amendment here that the collection rate might be about 65% actually shows you how disastrous this would actually be. So whatever the attractions are, one or two of the things that the money will be spent on, this should not be supported. And I don't care what other authorities do, whether they abandon all their schemes. This authority should make certain that the poorest in our society are protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Rhys, do you wish to respond?
No, it's fine, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. That is the end of the debate. Councillor Morris, as mover of the amendment, would you like to respond before it is voted on?
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Obviously no surprises there. I believe the Greens abstained last year, but they still know that the budget would pass by their abstention. And, you know, you can't really sit there like Pontius Pilate, washing your hands of responsibility. I think the council tax reduction scheme, I think we proposed 10%, previously Labour proposed 15%. So it's just worth correcting some of those facts. But, and of course, I can't see there being any real change to the economics if Labour does win, because we're still lumbered with PFI across the city for decades to come. PFI is ruining a lot of the public services, and I think Labour do need to take some responsibility for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You are voting on the recommendation and the vote will be open for 15 seconds. Please vote now. Thank you. Thank you. I have the votes here. 14 against 49. No abstentions. So the amendment falls. Moving swiftly on again to Amendment 2, Conservative Revenue Amendment 2. This amendment involves the revenue section of the budget. There will be one vote at the end of the debate. So I'd like to call on Councillor Steve Smith to move the amendment.
Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. This amendment is broadly in two parts. First, we are reallocating a relatively small sum from some internal corporate functions to frontline services. Now, I know these aren't easy decisions. They're not consequence-free. But to govern is to choose. We're choosing to direct funds towards priorities and the priorities of people outside this room. Now, Councillor Edwards, you asked for proposals that prioritised essential services and protected the most vulnerable. It's a shame you couldn't think of any, so let me help you out a little bit. How about short breaks for disabled children? A vital lifeline that supports some of the most vulnerable families in our city. This budget proposes to cut them. This amendment reverses that cut. How about targeted youth work? Not only is the youth zone that the Mayor mentioned in his opening sucking up resource from across the city, but the overall envelope for targeted youth work is falling. Now, in a previous life, I used to run Young Bristol. I know it doesn't take much money to change a life, but at this time of all times, it's a mistake. This amendment reverses that cut. In our district's car parks, that once again, this budget proposes to introduce charges that will decimate our town and village centres that are already hanging by a thread in some cases. It's unnecessary and it's damaging. This amendment reverses it. The second part of our amendment is to bring forward the spending of some of the money raised through the Clean Air Zone. In the forecast at the moment is that by the end of the budget year that we're discussing, there will be unspent £31.5 million sitting there in CAS fees not being used. Meanwhile, we're proposing, or the budget is proposing, to freeze the transport levy that fund subsidised bus services. That's a real terms cut to that transport levy because the administration keeps bickering with WECA about it. Meanwhile, there are bus deserts across this city. Bus services are being cut or cancelled all over the place. That's happening now. Now, there are proposals in a couple of years' time to introduce some extra money. That money's already sitting there. Why are we waiting? Let's get it out there, get it used, and spend it on increasing the bus levy and protecting some of these vital services. Similarly, local transport schemes funded through area committees. There's proposals to use some of the CAS money for that, drip-fed over a number of years. Every councillor in this room has a list, I'm sure, of safety-critical
30 seconds, please, Steve.
local infrastructure that could be funded by that money now. So why wait? Let's get it out there. Let's get it spent. As I said, to govern is to choose. You have a choice now. If you're happy to cut short breaks for disabled children, if you are happy to cut vital targeted youth work when it is so needed right now, then vote against this amendment. But people out there are watching you.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like now to call on Councillor Jonathan Hucker to second the amendment.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I believe that public services should be well resourced and properly funded. In fact, that the quality of life of our residents depends upon it. But is it really necessary for Bristol City Council to have a Department of International Affairs that is staffed by 7 people? Perhaps this department is successfully attracting inward investment to the city. But if that is the case, then why is the Communications Department, which is even more well-resourced, not telling us about it? Within Policy, Strategy and Communications, the Deputy Head of External Communications has 8 direct reports. The Creative Manager has 9 direct reports. Perhaps I could accept all of this if basic local services were being properly delivered, but they are not. It took 12 months to get a litter bin installed in my ward, as officers from the Council and Bristol Waste could not decide who should authorise it. It took 6 months to get some broken fence posts removed from the side of a road, as highways, parks and estates could not decide whose responsibility it was. 9 months ago, I asked for the white markings, which used to say slow, to be repainted on the road outside of a sheltered accommodation complex. It has still not been done. What is slow is the Council's response. These are just a few examples of the inefficiency that I have encountered in the short time that I have been a member of this Council. And why does it take the Council, on average, 6 months to collect payments that are due within 30 days? Why is one part of Bristol City Council spending potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds fighting another part of Bristol City Council over a piece of land? The land would have little economic value because it is subject to a 125-year lease at nil rent. Make no mistake, I have enormous respect for the hard work and dedication of the many council officers that I work with. However, the council could and should do some things better. The council spends £1.5 billion of taxpayers' money each year. If you believe that some of this money could be spent more wisely, then please support our amendment.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on Councillor Patrick McAllister to speak on behalf of the Green Party.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is an interesting amendment, and it is certainly much more reasonable than the one we have just heard previously. Despite the undeniable pantomime nature of the meeting that Mark elegantly pointed out earlier, that does make the whole process somewhat pointless, I don't think any member here would actually object to reinstating funding for short care breaks for SEND families or to improving facilities for young people. A few things did immediately stand out to me upon reading this amendment and through the officer comments. The very top line does mention the disproportionate impact on female employees and the worsening of the council's gender pay gap. It's not great, but incidental, I'm sure. And what item does that actually pertain to? Cutting the international affairs budget, which sounds interesting, but it would have the side effect, as clearly shown, of damaging Bristol's inclusivity and integration offering. Yet another body blow to the cultural sector after chronic mismanagement under this administration, coming at a time when international events have heightened community tensions in our city. What else? cutting the budget for consultation and public relations, despite this team already having endured swinging cuts with more pencilled in. Bristol City Council is about to transition into the committee model of governance, and we will need the ability to properly consult with residents in the future. Cutting this department runs the risk of causing the council to operate blind, making ill-informed decisions that will not have the backing of local communities. I know from my own ward the damage that can be done to communities by decisions made which don't take into account their feelings on the ground, and this amendment would risk much more of that disruption across the city. As for the increased spending, it's a mixed bag, including some genuinely valuable and, in isolation, very beneficial changes. But unfortunately, the service implications of some of the changes do seem to be quite negative. The headline components to increase funding for SEND short breaks and youth zones, and I think given the tragic events of recent weeks, we all appreciate the need to support these services. But the funding increases here are drops in the bucket compared to the budget pressures the council is facing, and the services that are being cut are vital to the council's operations. It's for these reasons that the Green Group cannot support this amendment. Of course, we all know the primary reason why youth services have been cut by nearly 80% since 2010, and why the entire edifice of SEND support is crumbling, bringing local authorities down with it. The austerity programme that the government has forced on the country has left the social safety net in tatters, and unfortunately, we are not seeing signals of change from the main opposition party either.
30 seconds, please, Patrick.
Thank you. I genuinely think that this is a well-intentioned amendment proposal, even if our screens might disagree with it based on values. But ultimately, it is just another Tory budget amendment trying to paper over the cracks wrenched by their own government's cruel austerity. If Conservative members want to truly improve lives in Bristol, as I believe they do, they should lobby their own government to give Bristol the funding it needs to do that, instead of tinkering around the edges.
Thank you. I'd now like to call on Councillor Steve Pearce to speak on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I'm getting bored with these amendments.
Don't worry, still more to go.
So while I see the benefit of some of the spending proposals, we don't believe the positive aspects of this amendment outweigh the negatives. I appreciate that after Brexit, Tories see it as easy to go after bureaucrats. But the policy and strategy teams, the international team, and the public relations and consultation teams aren't just faceless drones making up part of the so-called Whitehall blob. On policy and strategy, the policy and public affairs teams are part of this team. They supported the executive to successfully coordinate the Levelling Up Fund bid for Philwood, securing 14 million for a regeneration project in a deprived area of the city. As an Old Wester, this is a cause close to my heart, and I think everyone in this chamber should appreciate how vital a project is. Likewise, they helped the administration secure the funding for Temple Quarter. That's 10,000 homes, 12,000 jobs, and a 1.6 billion boost to the local economy. Without a mayor's office, their work supporting the Executive and Policy and Resources Committee will be all the more important. It would be short-sighted and entirely counterproductive to sack staff members in a team that provides vital support for leveraging government funding. As all parties have acknowledged, government grants are awarded through what's essentially a beauty contest. If you lose, tough luck. No money for new community facilities in deprived areas, bringing kids out of poverty and levelling up our divided city. We need to ensure that Bristol City Council is at the top of its game when it comes to coordinating bids for funding. That alone should be reason enough to vote for this to vote against this amendment. I'm going to be so glad when I finish.
30 seconds, please, Steve.
We're a leading European city, not a village, and we need to attract international investors to deliver a just transition. I'm proud of our relationships with Twin Cities, and when And when we have such an inward-looking government, we need our cities and regions to maintain international ties. I urge councillors to do the right thing, the financially prudent thing, and vote against this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
Which part of no do you not understand?
I'd like now to call on Councillor Andrew Varney to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. There is a great deal in this amendment that we can agree on, such as helping with the delivery of youth services, especially for young people with SEND, so badly let down by this current administration. We also support bringing forward spending on local transport schemes and supported buses to improve access to sustainable travel. The Hungerford estate in my ward of Brislington West has been without a bus service for over a year. This has meant hundreds of people, often elderly, have been cut off from accessing doctors and local shops. To add insult to injury, they were excluded from the Westlink scheme, although the minibuses regularly use the estate as a shortcut. We also support a delay in the imposition of charges for district car parks. There are 2 car parks in my ward where the introduction of parking fees is being planned. And as I said in a previous meeting, I am worried that this will have a negative impact on our local shopping areas. We are not so sure about the removal of the inflationary uplift to allotment fees and charges. Having held meetings with allotment holders in my ward, they agree that charges need to increase and recognise that they haven't increased for many years. It seems reasonable that these should increase in line with inflation to help deliver a better service. We also have concerns about the source of funding for these proposals, which are likely to lead to staff cuts in already overstretched departments. However, unlike Councillor Pearce, we feel the positives in this amendment outweigh the negatives, and so the Bristol Liberal Democrats will be supporting it, and we want to thank the Conservatives for engaging with the budget process and for making the effort to submit budget amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Hopkins, would you like to respond on behalf of the Knoll Community Party?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've got the meat of this amendment, which basically says use money from CAS to support bus services and a couple of other worthy causes. Fine. That's very good indeed, and we approve of it. What we're not quite so certain on is whether these departments will continue to function or actually start functioning fully effectively that cuts are proposed from. But I take comfort from the fact that we'll have it likely change in administration, and in 3 months, you know, we will be looking at all spending, hopefully. I think that's important. I'm surprised in a way, because this is a revenue amendment, and revenue amendments are going to run for some considerable time. I'm surprised that officers didn't actually object to the use of the CAZ money in this way, because how safe is it? We already know that quite a lot of the tickets that have been issued weren't issued legally. There's potential for serious challenge here. So we don't know how dependable that money is that's sat in reserve and what the ongoing situation would be. Having said that, I'm in favour of actually taking a chance with that and actually using it to improve our bus services, because I think for so many people in Bristol, that's an absolute priority. So, although we have concerns about some of the aspects of this, we will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Mayor Rees, would you like to respond?
I'm fine, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, as the mover of the amendment, would you like to respond to the debate before we have a vote?
I will briefly, thank you, my Lord Mayor. First of all, thank you to our friends over here who are going to support us, I think. Councillor McAllister and Councillor Pearce both made similar points, which actually is what I said right at the top of my speech, that these are not straightforward decisions, that these departments are not bottomless money pits that we can just keep taking out of without consequence. I understand that, we all do. But this is about priorities. It's about choices. It's that balance between the positive and the negative. And our view is that the frontline services that we're trying to protect here, the short breaks, the youth services, are a higher priority. They are more important than the internal corporate services, however however valuable those may be. And Steve, you know, you talked about faceless bureaucrats, Whitehall blob. That wasn't my words. That isn't what I think. But this is a balance. It's a choice. And you know, if you believe that the policy and strategy team or the public relations team need the money more than families in my ward who rely on short breaks, I'll be happy to introduce you to them, and you can explain to them why you think that's the case. Got a choice to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, the amendment summary is shown on the screen. And again, this will be an e-vote, so please ensure you are in allocated seats so that your vote is recorded accurately. You are voting on the recommendation and the vote will be open for 15 seconds. Please vote now. Okay, we have the results of the vote. For 21, against 42, and 0 abstentions. So the amendment falls. Moving on now to Amendment 3, the Conservative Capital Amendment 1. This amendment involves the capital section of the budget. There will be one vote at the end of the debate. I can see you're already standing up, John, so I'll let you carry on.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. I rise to move the Conservative Group amendment to the capital budget. Our amendment is quite simple, uncontroversial, and will be by all members today. Third time lucky, maybe. As we all know, the Council is very inefficient and slow in spending SIL monies. These monies are meant to mitigate the harm caused by development, and they do need to be spent promptly in order to be fully effective. This amendment seeks to earmark £700,000 out of total unallocated SIL monies of £1.28 million to deliver improvements to our parks and to fund refurbishment of currently unfunded, much-needed improvements to children's play areas and play equipment. The Equalities Impact Assessment is very supportive, and I would urge all members to read it. I think we all know that parks have a wide range of benefits to the whole of the community, providing opportunities for physical activity, as well as improving mental health and well-being. Indeed, the restorative concept of rus in urbe, bringing the countryside into urban living, goes back to Roman times, when civic leaders in Rome recognised the importance of green spaces to soften the built environment. Here in Bristol, our forefathers established many beautiful parks and green spaces. It's a great legacy. Sadly, in recent years, investment in our parks has reduced. Our parks and children's play areas have been left to languish by this administration. This capital amendment is an opportunity to reverse this trend and to bring back some much-needed investment into Bristol's parks, green spaces and children's play areas. I urge members to support this capital amendment. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, John. I'd like to call on Councillor Richard Eddy to second.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I rise to second the Tory budget amendment. As member may be aware, this files strategic SIL and provides for important new investment in parks and children's plays citywide. In recent years, full council have wisely backed amendments reallocating strategic SIL to a number of frontline services, which Bristolians strongly feel about. I hope councillors will support this worthwhile amendment today. I'll use 3 local bishops with examples of the sort of area where it could help, but I'm very much aware they're typical of examples in all your wards, and all of those, in my view, could benefit. Firstly, back in 2016, Parks undertook consultation to invest over £60,000 refreshing the Lakeme Grove Children's Play Area. This serves the centre of the Highridge Council estate and was originally invested back in the 90s when scores of new family houses were built. The much-needed project was a victim of the Mayor's initial budget savings. It is just the sort of investment we could revisit. Secondly, the residents of Headley Park sought for decades to secure council funding for new children's play equipment in Headley Lane Park. Unsuccessful, they turned their energy outwards, and the so-called Headley Parkers levered in ITV funding to secure play equipment, which was adopted by the council, met our strict play standards. Obviously, we need to ensure there is money to refresh this play space. Thirdly, for over a decade, the bishops of our councillors have been working with parents in Northern Bedminster Down to provide desperately needed new play area.
30 seconds, please, Richard.
Although local housing produced this was not enough, and recent cuts to Parks budgets meant actually any aspiration to build a pair of equipment here is purely a pipe dream for local people. Please, all these three examples could be mirrored in your own wards. Please give this amendment your support today.
Thank you, Richard. I'd now like to call on Councillor Martin Fodor to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Lord Mayor, we're being asked by the Conservative Group to make a capital amendment to the outgoing Mayor's budget. The proposal is quite familiar, I must say, and if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then all credit to the group to my left, not politically, obviously. Thanks for recycling my successful budget amendment text from last year. Honed over 3 years, in fact, until it gained the unanimous support of this council. Taking unallocated strategic SIL, the developer funds controlled by the Mayor for now, and spending it on parks and play facilities, of course, does sound useful. Until the funds are spent, they are available. So why not use them to improve our parks and our play equipment? But on closer look, this raid on the budget needed for the Frome Gateway regeneration is unwise and unadvisable, and it does have equalities impacts. As the note on the proposal from officers says, if the amendment progresses, this will reduce the funding available to commission the Frome Gateway framework. It says there may be insufficient funds to progress the full framework. So why would this matter? It matters because the local community in St Paul's and St Jude's are very sceptical of the council. They don't trust us to look after the area, and they see regeneration as a euphemism for gentrification. Without a strong framework to guide development, then it will be gentrification, not regeneration. The council, just last week, you'll find it on the BBC and lots of other news outlets, the council issued an assurance to residents that it won't be that. But the area along the Frome is already facing all sorts of speculative development. We must manage untrammelled development, and the speculation has to be controlled. With a framework and community input to the process, our public goals and objectives and the protection of equalities issues for the community can be achieved as far as possible. But without one, we could be left with the wrong development in the wrong place of the wrong type. It would mean less affordable housing, less council housing, missing public facilities, less public space, and indeed less likelihood of creating vibrant, balanced, diverse communities, able to rely on active travel, healthy spaces, healthy streets.
30 seconds, please, Martin.
Yeah, thanks. So speculation at the expense of inner city communities in our city is not something Greens want to see. The other drawback with the amendment, if it's voted through, is there might be something for your election leaflets, of course, but As we know, this is a pantomime, and the new funds for parks and play areas in the ward will not be in your wards. They are going to go into a strategic fund. That strategic fund, currently controlled by the Mayor, has to be targeted at growth areas, and it still will be. It won't be your wards.
Can you wrap up, please, Martin? Thanks.
It would be better this funding is used to help guide development, look after the area and the community, and keep the promises the council's made. My advice to the council is reject the proposal, vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to call on Councillor Ellie King to speak on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The most palatable of the amendments put forward for sure. The strategic SIL that is referred to is currently defined as unallocated, but is currently penciled to progress the Frome Gateway Regeneration Project and Green Infrastructure. Frome Gateway is hugely important, a brownfield regeneration project that will benefit the whole city. It has involved extensive resident engagement to inform how best to deliver homes, jobs, parks and other social and health-related spaces in that area. Diverting money away from this project jeopardises the trust built with those engaged communities and our ability to deliver on our priorities. Under the Labour administration, the Council is already spending significant sums of money on parks and play parks, and I'm incredibly proud of this investment. We've currently allocated around £6 million on improving our parks, including Redcatch, Hengrove, Albury Court, Argyle Road, Victoria Park, Beverston Gardens, St Agnes and Rawnsley, alongside 9 refurbished play parks on land in council estates. And of course, collectively, we all have through many others in our area committee SIL. There are other parks that could do with improvements, no doubt a worthy cause, but strategic SIL is a finite resource that can only be used in areas of growth and regeneration and must also be used for other vital projects such as road improvements, green infrastructure and active travel facilities. But if the majority of councillors believe this is the most appropriate way to spend that budget, then we won't stand in the way of that. Again, noting this is geographically determined by growth areas. I'm afraid, Councillor Eddy, Bishopsworth is highly unlikely to be eligible for strategic SIL. A pinch of salt. It's not lost on me that if we keep chipping away at strategic SIL pot, then we continue to undermine our ability to get our major strategic projects in the city progressed, and crucially ensure that we develop brownfield regeneration, which is world-class and supports communities through creating great, healthy places. We have to show more ambition and vision for our city than that. I've talked in this chamber before about how the regeneration of Castle Park will not only bring improved cultural, active travel, connectivity, accessibility and parks improvements, but most important of all, it will improve the safety of the park. A life was tragically lost there last year, and this week another horrific and unacceptable attack has taken place. The park and the plan for the park will support a huge range of residents and visitors to enjoy the space safely and inclusively. It is pivotal, transformational projects like this we should be working collectively to support and ensure we fund properly. So, like the budget on the whole, there's no cost-free decisions.
30 seconds.
We'll be abstaining on the amendment, and regardless of whether it passes or not, we look forward to working with members from all parties to form a consensus on how strategic SIL should be used moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Now I'll move on to Councillor Sarah Classic to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I rise today we'll actually be supporting this budget amendment. The amendment is about investing in the heart of our communities, our parks and green spaces. Parks and playgrounds are the lungs of our cities, the place where families gather, where children laugh and where communities come together. They are not just patches of grass and swings, they are essential components of a vibrant and healthy society. By reallocating unallocated SIL funds to enhance our parks and playgrounds, we are not only investing in physical spaces, but also in the well-being of our citizens. Improved green spaces offer a myriad of benefits that extend far beyond mere aesthetics. Moreover, enhancing our parks and playgrounds fosters social cohesion. These are places where people from all walks of life converge, where friendships are formed and where bonds are strengthened. By investing in these communal spaces, we are nurturing a sense of belonging and unity within our neighbourhoods. Additionally, improved green spaces have shown to have a positive impact on mental health, and in our fast-paced urban environments, parks offer a sanctuary of tranquility, a refuge from the stresses of daily life. Furthermore, investing in parks and playgrounds is an investment in the future. By providing safe and inviting spaces for our children to play and explore, we are sowing the seeds of a healthier and happier generation. These spaces stimulate creativity, encourage curiosity, and instill a love for nature that will be carried forward to generations to come. In conclusion, our parks and green spaces are at the heart of our communities and deserve properly funding. We'll be supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Sarah. Gary, would you like to respond on behalf of the Knoll Community Party?
Certainly, thank you, Lord Mayor. Well, we'll be supporting this. Parks are a priority for the city and they must continue to be so, and every bit helps, so that's fine. What I would like to refer to is some of these speeches which seem to wander completely away from the subject of the proposal. We actually we actually have in our ward a plan now for a regeneration of our town centre. It's absolutely vital. 90% of our residents in the ward are desperate for it to proceed to get a new shopping centre. And that development will produce £4 million of strategic sill. So it's vitally important. And where is it next to? A vitally important park that's desperately in need of funding. And that funding will be blocked by the parties who are actually opposing our regeneration scheme. Now, I mean, I know that it was unfortunate the Labour Party played hokey-cokey with their approval or disapproval of the scheme, but eventually it's gone through the processes. We have a resident who's actually opposing this and taking this council to court. I have to say that two of the parties, the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats, have been most irresponsible with this. They have not taken proper account of what local opinion actually is. They have not looked at the reality of this, and bluntly, they are actually being extremely damaging towards our community in opposing the scheme. So basically, I support this amendment, and I think that all people should think very carefully consequences of their action when they play politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Marvin, would you like to respond?
No, it's all fine for the councillors to lead this, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. This is the end of the debate. Councillor Galandris, would you like to respond to anything you've heard?
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I keep thinking third time lucky, maybe. I'm grateful to the support from the KCP and the Liberal Democrats. I'm grateful for Labour to abstain. I'm genuinely puzzled that the Green Party does not seem to want to support green spaces and parks. I find that mind-boggling and very strange. I hope, because you're unwhipped, that some of you will see the light and will recognise that Green Party supporting green spaces and parks is fairly normal and quite right. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Thank you, John. Okay, the amendment summary is shown on the screen. This will be an e-vote. So you're in your allocated seats so that your vote is recorded accurately. You okay? Okay, please vote now. I'm going to run out of Lucas Edge. It's going to be one of those meetings. Yeah. Oh, it's vodka in this, anyway, don't worry. Okay, we have the votes counted, and for are 20 and against 17. Abstains 26. So the amendment passes. Thanks, everyone. Okay, come on. We're moving on to Amendment 4. The Liberal Democrat Revenue Amendment 1, please. So this amendment involves the revenue section of the budget. There will be one vote at the end of the debate. And I'd like to call on Councillor Andrew Brown to the amendment.
Sorry, got a bit ahead of myself there, my Lord Mayor. I'm not going to rehearse all the arguments about the funding and cost pressures the Council faces. We've heard enough about that. But suffice to say, it's been more difficult than ever to put together amendments for this budget. In the time allowed, with the resources that we have at our disposal, I don't think any of the groups are going to be able to do anything other than tinker around the edges of the overall budget, especially given the constraints imposed. My group's approach has been to work with officers to produce an amendment that focuses on two key issues that have recently been discussed in this chamber with unanimous support, and in such a way that they minimise the impact on other services and the reserves from which we're proposing to take money from. As such, it's a modest proposal. First, subsidised buses. We all know in this chamber the challenges that people across the city face with the reduction and loss of bus routes over the years. Now, this chamber agreed 2 months ago that the CAS fund should be spent predominantly on new projects to encourage the use of public transport and active travel. But what have the last 2 months seen? Well, we've seen a schedule of the income from the CAS funds, and we've seen it used to plug the general revenue account, plug the budget gap. It's used as a substitute for ongoing revenue spending and kicking the can down the road for future administrations to fix. And that means all of us who are hoping to be here going forward when the committee system comes in. We've seen 16 million of that CAS monies already used in this year that we're still in, which wasn't a feature of the budget last year. And so there's no doubt that CAS monies will have to be reprofiled and reallocated. And I'm actually impressed that the Tories have tried to do that in the amendment that they brought forward. I didn't feel that that was quite the way to go forward for this meeting, but well done to them for that. So this motion is about setting a marker for what we want to see going forward, and that is to bring forward funds from the unutilised reserves, to accelerate the small element of new funding on supported buses that's anticipated to come in 25-26, so that services can start in this coming year. Now, we know that it takes months to put these things together, to get things up and running, and that is why it's a modest amount of money that we're proposing towards buses. Libraries. Last month, we had a motion here, and we talked about the impact that the recruitment freeze has had in crippling the branch library service in this council.
30 seconds, please, Andrew.
Now, that was imposed due to overspends elsewhere in the council, but it has had an impact, and we're still seeing that impact. 4 libraries were closed today, including the library in my ward. So our amendment is another modest measure to help support the service to recover and cover things like agency costs that might be required whilst permanent positions are being recruited to. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to call on Councillor Tim Kent to second.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second our budget amendment, which will make a real difference within our communities and counter the negative impact caused by Labour's cuts to our vital community services. Our library network has been severely undermined by a policy to cut funding to libraries and allow branches to close at no notice to residents. No notice to the community groups that use them. No notice to those that rely on the computers to job hunt or pay their bills. This recovery fund will ensure our branch libraries have the staff to open, money to invest in more books, out-of-hours opening and better engagement with their communities. It will ensure libraries remain at the centre of our communities. We have also seen our community bus services devastated by the decision of local Labour leaders to sacrifice bus routes. This is despite being offered funding to support them, ironically by central government. We have lost dozens of bus routes here in Bristol due to the decision to divert money off into empty Westlink buses or birthday bus tickets. Whole communities have been left with no service, such as South Whitchurch in our ward. In Brislington, as my colleague has already said, cutting buses that connected communities in South Bristol to the only college that does A-levels in south of the river. Residents in Knoll have told me that they are now unable to access South Bristol Hospital as their bus service was cut by Labour. But shockingly, That cut, the last budget, was supported by the Green Party. Of course, last year, the Green Party were Labour's little helpers. Last year, voting to charge for recycling and to vote down community bus services. Happy to cut services last year. Oh, how the Greens have twisted this year, now they're close to an election. Our funding will help bring forward the restoration of bus services to underserviced communities months earlier than currently planned. It will help people choose to leave their cars at home and choose sustainable transport. So I hope councillors will support our amendment, although I fear the majority in this chamber will not. And we'll probably see the Greens now vote against libraries, vote against buses, just as we saw them vote against parks just a few minutes ago. How May's elections are going to go really well for you? It looks like your strategists
30 seconds, please,
have really
Tim.
thought this through on what you're going to do today. I think your strategists were, we'll just vote against everything and not care about the consequences to our communities. So you have a choice. You can continue to vote against every option brought to you today and then vote against the budget if you wish, and we'll be back here next week. But believe me, we will continue fighting for our communities even if you can't be bothered over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'd now like to call on Councillor Jenny Bartle to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
Yeah, no pressure. Quiet down. All right.
Settle down, please, everyone.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, the two outcomes that the Lib Dems want from this, which is supported bus services being reinstated slightly earlier and keeping our libraries open, and rather than from being closed with no notice, obviously everyone approves of that. But where have they got the money from? That's the reason we're going to be voting against it. They want to plunder a couple of our reserves, the Climate and Ecological Reserve and the Community Resilience Reserve. These are doing really important work. They're paying the wages of 11 staff currently. And we shouldn't be just stopping that work to try and fund something that should have come out of a revenue rather than a reserve. And I really think that is the key point, right? That they couldn't find anywhere in the revenue fund to cut. So they've just gone for some reserves that, oh, well, we can get away with that. Like, I really think it's an important point to make that that it is, you have been...
Can we just have one person speaking at a time, please, Joss?
We engaged a lot. We engaged a lot in this, and we decided that tinkering around the edges was not worth it. That the things that Greens want to see for this city involve strategic development over a course of months, not a couple of little, oh, we found a reserve right over here, or a deep cut to the council tax reduction scheme in the case of the Tories. We weren't willing to do those things. We think that the 6-month process of scrutiny is not the same as a 6-month process of a budget development. Scrutiny is not the same as writing your policies from the outset and directing officer resource into developing those policies. We think it needs much more work, and I think that is demonstrated by every single one of the amendments that has been put through here in the last 3 years that I've seen. They've either not come to fruition, or they've been kind of ignored, or they've been voted down because, well, obviously that would have a terrible outcome and everyone agrees on it. So I really want to reject that. But yeah, going back to the amendment, I suppose, you know, the future will be collaborative. We will be able to hopefully develop some way to protect our libraries more effectively.
30
together.
seconds, please, Jenny.
We all have the same priorities, and I'm sad that we can't support your work because you haven't been able to find the money in a sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And I'd now like to call on Councillor Bennett to speak on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The problem with this amendment is not what they're trying to fund, but what it would cut. We need more supported bus services to connect neighbourhoods and communities across the city. And I appreciate the disruption caused to residents caught by temporary library closures that are a result of 14 years of Tory and coalition economic mismanagement. We remain proud to have maintained all our libraries where so many councils have been unable to do so. I've been campaigning for the restoration of bus services to Stapleton in my ward, and even though saving the bus service would make me a hero locally, I wouldn't want to cut the funding in the way that you've proposed. It just wouldn't be the right thing for Bristol, for our communities, or for our planet. Don't be mistaken by the word reserves. The funds this amendment would reallocate are to be spent in the next financial year. This funding is crucial to decarbonise Bristol, support a wildlife recovery, and build up the strength of underrepresented communities in the areas of highest deprivation. The amendment would cut $250,000 of funding from the Climate and Ecological Programme. This programme is already delivering our climate and ecological action plans and training staff on how to get better climate and ecological results from the hundreds of millions that we spend on our capital projects. The team has been incredibly successful in its bids, managing to secure over £15 million of external funding to further our objectives, ensuring that we get good value. Next year, its focus is on implementing Bristol's Just Transition Declaration, ensuring social justice is at the forefront of climate transition, and delivering the Keep Bristol Cool framework to prepare for the extreme heat waves that will become increasingly common. The Community Resilience Fund is a brilliant example of deliberative democracy, providing redistributive funding to community organisations and equality groups right across the city, including the Malcolm X Centre, 125, BRICS, the Somali Resource Centre, the Bangladesh Association, Bristol's Women Voice working with refugee women, the Brigstone Project, and many more. This is the most important year for the COF to spend its funding to deliver its projects by 2026, but cutting the funding by $200,000 as proposed would delay the majority of these. Even worse, it would irrevocably break the trust placed in us by these communities to deliver. I'd invite the Liberal Democrats to specify which part of these programmes specifically that you consider worth sacrificing.
30 seconds, please, Marley.
Do they think that preventing climate catastrophe is not a priority? Is restoring a nature and wildlife recovery not worth the buck? And which community or equality group should have their funding stripped? This amendment exposes an arrogance, a failure to learn from the experience of getting into bed with the Conservatives and turbocharging austerity, which caused untold damage to Britain. Lord Mayor, Bristol deserves so much better than this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I'd now like to call on Councillor Jeff Gollop to speak on behalf of the Conservative Group.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's very clear that budget amendments are a key part of the pantomime. I'm trying to work out whether it's the Greens or the Labour Party that come closest to being Prince Charming. And I have to say at the moment, I think it's both approaching ugly sister status and not going any better. But I do find so much of this baffling. I find it baffling that a Green Party does not want to even put forward amendments to show a flavour of what you believe in and what you care about. That seems extraordinary. I'd vote for the Lib Dem amendment on the back of Tim Kent's passion in what he had to say. Where's your passion? Your passion's in criticising everybody and actually standing up for nothing and putting nothing forward. That, my Lord Mayor, is abject failure. And let's be honest, no, you didn't vote for the council tax reduction scheme last year. What you did is you abstained when you know it would go through anyway. That is when you could have stopped it, but you didn't. You supported it by sitting on your hands. That isn't leadership. That isn't taking decisions. That isn't making it happen. That is running scared, which is what it looks like you're doing now. So, but perhaps I ought to move on to the amendment. Now,
don't feel you need to.
No. Well, you see, I'm intrigued by Councillor Bartle's definition of the word plunder, because to me, plunder is when you take something and run off with it and you don't give it back. When you take it out one year and put it back the next, you're borrowing it short term, but you're borrowing it to prove a point for something that is sustainable, that is real, and that is deliverable. I do not believe it is appropriate to use such an emotive word as plunder to describe something that is being creative to find a way of doing something that you as a party were unable to do. So the fact is that what we see here is two issues which now leave me baffled with the Labour Party. I've sat in meetings for years where you have told me the importance of bus services in marginalised areas, where you've told me the importance of libraries to actually help those who do not have and need support to encourage them to learn and get the experiences of our communities.
30 seconds, please, Jeff.
What do you do? What do you do? You just sit by, let the bus services be closed down in areas that are most isolated, and then create a random process of opening libraries that will result in the numbers of usages of all libraries being down. My Lord Mayor, failure after failure. I do not understand. This provides a mechanism to say, here's a way of doing it, and now you're going to sit on your hands and vote against. This is madness. My Lord Mayor, it may come as a surprise, but we will be supporting the Lib Dem motion, and I promise you we're not getting into bed with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Councillor Hopkins, would you like to respond on behalf of the Null Community Party?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We clearly, as I think everyone does here, supports where the spending would actually be important areas. And strangely enough, the Community Resilience Fund, which is a concept which is very important, I have looked at this in a degree of detail and have concerns as to whether the money has been spent as wisely as it should have been. And I think that's shared by a number of people. I think that, therefore, although I have doubts about this being a coherent long-term policy, on balance, it makes sense to support this. And actually, we hope again that there will be some more thorough work done in 3 months to actually make certain that our libraries survive, because it's not just a matter of bugging in some short-term cash. What's not actually happened is a plan that integrates what the services that the libraries could actually provide as being a trusted space in all our communities. More things should be delivered through libraries than are now, because we can't afford to have offices here and offices there, etc. And libraries could be doing more than they are at the moment, and they need support. But I haven't seen from either the proponents or the opponents of this any clear plan for making certain that libraries flourish and thrive into the future. So we'll support it, but you know, it's not exactly solving all the problems, is it?
Thank you, Gary. Marvin, would you like to respond at all?
No, again, I'll leave this to the councillors on there.
Okay, that's the end of the debate. So, Councillor Brown, as mover, would you like to respond to anything that's been said?
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. Yes, I will respond. I'll go around the comments in turn. Councillor Bartels, you talked about the source of the funding, as did your colleague, Councillor Stafford Townsend, when we proposed our amendment last year, and I'll give the same response again, which is I'm old enough to remember when a member of your benches got up and proposed taking money out of the flood defences reserves. I don't know if you yourself voted for it, but that was something that was proposed from your benches, so I'll take comments on the source of funds with a pinch of salt. Councillor Bennett, I think you should reread the service impact section on the forms, because although you're right, some of those reserves may be being used for other things, what is being proposed to be drawn down is not coming out of the funds that are allocated to other things. It's unallocated parts of those reserves, and we worked with officers to reduce the amount that we were asking for, specifically so that it could be a more sustainable solution. Councillor Gollop, I'd just like to say there is no room in my bed or the Liberal Democrats' bed for one of you, let alone all of you. And Councillor Hopkins, I think you're right. This isn't proposing to be a solution to the issues that the library service or indeed the subsidised buses in this city. It's a measure designed to bridge a gap into the next system, and then when we're all together as a committee, as committees, we can look at how we develop those strategic approaches to services going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Okay, the amendment summary is shown on screen. So again, this will be an e-vote. Please ensure in your allocated seats so that your vote is recorded accurately. You are voting on the recommendation and the vote will be open for 15 seconds. Can you please vote now? Yeah, no, I'm just... We've got it. Thank you. So I have the results of the vote. For 20, against 41, and abstentions 0. So the amendment fails. Thank you. We now move to section 7 of the procedure. At this point, I'd like to ask the Chief Financial Officer to confirm that the position in terms of the budget amendments that have been carried.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I can confirm that from the 4 budget amendments that were submitted, 1 has been carried, and that is the Amendment 3 from the Conservative Group, Capital Amendment 1.
Thank you very much. So, as per the procedure, I, as Lord Mayor, now formally move that full council notes the Chief Financial Officer's statement as required under the Local Government Act 2003. This is set out in full at paragraph 17 of the main budget report and confirms the robustness of the budget estimates. I'd like now to ask Councillor O'Rourke, as Deputy Lord Mayor, to second the motion.
I second the motion.
Thank you. May I ask full council to formally note the Chief Financial Officer's statement? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Thank you. I now suggest we take a 20-minute refreshment break. But please come back in 20 minutes. Thank you. Thank you all for coming back on time this time. We'll just let a few stragglers come in. And then we'll crack on. Okay, we now move to section 8 of the procedure. This will be the wider debate on the revenue and capital budget as amended. This is the opportunity to debate the budget that full council has amended and proposed to the Mayor. Following this debate, the Mayor will be asked to indicate whether he will accept these amendments and present an amended budget for approval, or if he wishes to take a period of time for consideration. Following the debate, there may be an adjournment in order for the Mayor to make that decision. Please may I remind members that this is the point where you can make comments about any part of the budget recommendations. So, to start with, I'd like to call on Councillor Guy Pulteney to speak on behalf of the Green Group.
My Lord Mayor, I'd like to test the will of Council, move direct to the vote. My Lord Mayor, I'd like to test the will of Council and move direct to the vote.
Happy to second.
Okay. Let's have an aye-nay vote and see where we are. Councillor Pearce is suggesting we move straight to the vote. Mark, you can do it in the pub. It'll be fine.
Lord Mayor, this is
Okay, I'm just testing the will, and it would be an electronic vote, I suppose. So, aye or nay, do we move to go to the vote on the budget with the one amendment? All those in favour? Aye. All those against? Wow, I like that. Thank you, Steve.
Don't say I never give you nothing.
I'm just going to, we'll have a short minute when...
Yeah, I accept the amended budget and over to councillors to vote.
Thank you very much. I think everyone's going to owe Councillor Pearce a pint at the end, but there you go. Okay, we have an amended budget that will be accepted by the Mayor. I can now advise full council that the Mayor has indicated that he is accepting the budget with the amendment as carried earlier at this meeting by full council. That being the case, we move straight to section 11 of the procedure. We are now going to proceed to vote on the budget recommendations as per the report and as displayed on the screen. Firstly then, as Lord Mayor, may I ask the Council to note recommendations A to F. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All against say nay. Okay, the ayes have it. So we now move to vote 1. This is recommendations G to O. I hereby move recommendations G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N and O. These are being shown on the screen soon. Have we got them on that screen? I've been told they're on the main screens down there, but my eyes aren't good enough to see from here. So I'd like to ask Councillor O'Rourke, as Deputy Lord Mayor, to second the motion.
I second the motion, reserving my remarks.
Thank you very much, Paula. Okay, so this will again be an e-vote. Please ensure you're in the right seats. You are voting on recommendations and the vote will be open for 15 seconds. Please vote now. Results are in. 419 against 40 and 1 abstention. So that has fallen. Do we still? Okay. So as that's fallen, we can't proceed with the rest of the votes. So you'll have to wait until I just get to my last page. That's not right.
Okay. Next Wednesday.
Okay, that will be the end of the meeting and we will come back, joy of joy, next Wednesday at 6 p.m. 2 p.m. even. Apologies. Thank you very much for attending.